memories from the novel into Dorian's psyche. And we decided that wasn't necessarily the most important thing because we were taking in a different direction. But yeah, it was important, I think, to be aware. I didn't want to be asked the question, so have you read Picture of Dorian Gray and say no? So I did read, I love the novel, but yeah, I think we've taken it in a different direction, and it's something that I think exists in a more natural way in 2014 as well.
Yeah, I mean, Dorian's kind of a rock star of his era.
Well, yeah, can we say like some of the references that you gave, John?
Yeah, so this is like, here's how Dorian Gray evolved. I had in my head Oscar Wilde's Dorian Gray. I had that sort of rarefied damn in my head, sort of petulant youth. And it was impossible to cast until Reed Carney walked in, dressed just like that, wearing all like that beautiful silver jewelry as Mother makes. And I said, well, that's it. That's Dorian Gray. I absolutely found Dorian Gray. So the process of working with Reed, and particularly Gabriele Pascucci, our brilliant costume designer, what I said to Gabriele was, rock and roll. Think David Bowie, think Mick Jagger in the Victorian era. So if you like Dorian Gray, that's the man's thing.
Just what's in the sort of, I mean, it's part of, you know, people dress up for Halloween, and it's one of those characters that just go around when you grow up. But I hadn't read the novel before, and I did before this, up to a point where it veers massively off being used to, I thought. So I sort of read up to a point a couple of times, and then just went off job description. Went to Cambridge University and spoke to some professors about Victorian medicine and the ethics of the time, and had my mind blown by the kind of practices they're up to and the ethical procedures that weren't in place. And they're kind of it's just a fascinating time scientifically. I became really into the science of the era and just how they were, you know, such groundbreaking times of science and discovery. And with all of that, and being in that kind of temperature of science, you know, that climate, the idea of creating life or creating something that's seemingly impossible didn't seem that impossible because they were undergoing such sort of groundbreaking discoveries at that time. So, yeah.
What was the most mind-blowing thing you learned about?
I mean, just the stuff they used to get up to was insane. They used to like, they were doing stuff on how people's bodies can still move after they've had their head chopped off. And they, it's like galvanism, so they put silver diodes between different parts of the muscles and chop your head off and then make your arm move like that. And they thought that they'd discovered the essence of life, electricity, and it wasn't.
And I must say, all of that paid off, because Harry is, without a doubt, our masterful prop actor. You know, you give a prop to Ava Green, she drops it or breaks it. You know, Harry is so specific. All the scenes where he's doing surgery, you know, it's actual Victorian surgical gear, and the practice and the detail. There are no insert shots of anyone else's hands. That is always Harry. And so, in a way, when we fans will appreciate this, the other great legendary prop actor in our world is Peter Cushing. You know, who would refine work detail. And sort of without knowing it, I think Harry's sort of you know, channeling that. When I see it on the set, it always makes my heart happy.
I had to do surgery. It was fun.
John, do surgery.
I can do surgery if anyone wants to do surgery. Any minor complaints.
You also knows how to cut off your head and make your arm move involuntarily. Someone wants to volunteer for that.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the architecture of Vanessa's possession? Because I think, in as much as we see her backstory and we know about the moments where she was taken, it might not be entirely clear, or I would love for you to shed more light on the nature of her possession and whether this was something that was always in her, whether this was something that she welcomed in, and just to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's that's obviously the primary part of the scene, which is, you know, what up with Vanessa. And you know, I will say that to me, the uber question of Penny Dreadful is, who is Vanessa Ives, and what lives is she going to touch and how? And I had a lot of discussions with Ava about that very question, which is, did she invite this thing in, or did it take her? And I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. And one of the great joys of the second season is really delving into that more deeply, not even just in terms of her backstory, but in terms of her standing on the cusp and having to make decisions based on her relationships with the other characters about good and evil. And so in the first season, I believe we present the question, and in the second season, we begin in some way to answer it, I hope.
So you're not going to tell us?
Yeah.
Okay, so were there characters that you explored when you were building this world that you did not include? And are there new monsters that we're going to meet in season 2? You know, the season finale ends with essentially us believing that Mina's master is alive and well somewhere in the world and was looking for hot brunette bride, which was not delivered to him, frustratingly. So what monsters are we going to meet? And are there any that you left out for narrative reasons?
Well, I explored a lot before I settled on, I also was going to do Creature and Frankenstein. Dorian Gray came late, and I almost knew I was going to rely into eventually our version of the Dracula story. And season 1 begins to do that. You meet Van Helsing, you meet Nina. But obviously we break from that text, and so as the series goes on, hopefully for a long time, we'll begin to lead more into the Dracula story. You'll meet, in the second season, you'll meet another character. Very important to that story will lead us further into the sort of Dracula origin story. You know, I thought about a lot. I thought about Dr. Moreau, who's like one of my favorites. So you know, I would hope someday to get to the Island of Lost Souls. We'll see how long Showtime likes our show. And next season is very different because, you know, having spent 10 years building this world. I've charted out the first 3 seasons, pretty much in my head, rather completely and on paper, in terms of what I think the story is. And what excites me about the second season is the cosmology, the theology of the show gets much larger. And so in the first season, we begin to establish these characters, we build this family, and in the second season, they are thrown into a much more threatening, theological, and supernatural world. Yeah, right? So I'll tell you a little bit about the second season. Then we have a scene that we cut from the first season I want to show you. What was frustrating to me as a writer when I was done with the first season is that I didn't have a villain who could speak. I didn't have an antagonist who could have scenes. We have an amazing actor who plays our vampire who's brilliant. He did exactly what we wanted him to do. But I'm a writer who writes for speech, and especially in a show like this that is so hyper-literate in its own odd way, I wanted a human or semi-human antagonist. And so I created the character of Madame Kali, who appears in the Seance episode, and then briefly in episode 8. And she is our antagonist in the second season, and she's picked up the great Helen McCrory. And I wrote the part, yes. I wrote the part specifically for Helen and begged her to do it, and thank God she said yes. So she becomes our antagonist, and her supernatural world will then become the big threat to all the gentlemen seen on the stage with me. So there was a scene in the 8th episode where I began to sort of explore what that story was going to be, what challenge she was going to pose to our family. But at the end of the day, we decided to take it out because it seemed more appropriately a scene for the second season rather than the first season. So here's a scene between the brilliant Helen McCrory and the brilliant Simon Russell Beale, which will give you a taste of where we're going in season 2.
One of my favorite characters is Ferdinand Lau. I think he's an amazing actor. I think he's amazingly written. He's hilarious. The first question I have is he a willing participant in this?
No, he is not. And Simon joins our family next year, so I hope you like Ferdinand Lau, because he knows deeply important.
He's extraordinary. I want to talk about the period because one of the things I noticed about his character is that he speaks in a false French accent, which was very much the fashion of the time. The British were obsessed with the French. Much like someone that you hate, you also want to have sex with them. And there's a word for that, which I'll spare you guys. You can look it up on the internet. And so he's speaking in this manufactured French accent. Was that something that came from you? Was that something you guys created together?
Yeah, we talked about it actually the day we did the table read, and he said, well, I was thinking about Cockney, and I said, I was thinking about European. He said, great, so here's a spoiler.
Yes.
His accent is actually a version of the great British playwright Tom Stoppard. So if you've ever heard Tom Stoppard speak, it's a bit like Simon's version of Ferdinand Lau.
It's hilarious. It mean, he's really extraordinary, and I'm excited to see more of him. Let's talk about the period. How much did you know about the Victorian era when you started the show, and for the actors, how challenging has it been to be era accurate? Is it difficult? Is it easy for you? I mean, you guys are creating a world together, but how often do you have to stop down and go, that would have never happened? Or
Well, I mean, a fair piece. I mean, I'm full-blooded Irish. My parents were from Belfast, so I was raised with a lot of sort of British and Irish history and literature from the time I was born here. So it's always been a part of my world. I love the period. And I wrote Sweeney Todd, which sent me straight to the Victorian world, the screenplay that is. So it's a world that I know pretty well. And as I say, I spent so many years researching it and reading it. I felt pretty versed to write our version of it. That's the thing. It's our version of Victoriana, you know, and it's heightened as appropriate to our characters. And the gents can speak to what it was like to walk around in those clothes. Yeah, there's a great book by Matthew Sweet called Inventing the Victorians, which became our Bible. And he's a great writer, so I encourage you all to get it. And he sort of like does some talking head interviews for us. And his premise is that Victorians were more like us than we like to think. We tend to think of them as sort of puritanical, closed down, colorless, drab, black and white people, and they actually weren't.
The byline should be Victorians have sex too.
Yes.
For any of the rest of you, has it been challenging to work in that era? Has it been pretty comfortable?
I mean, I think it's a stimulating thing to go back into time and to sort of be surrounded by the props and the costume and the amazing props guys, especially for the medical stuff. And, you know, you see the genuine article of people operating, you know, with saws and it's a good way into that sort of world and the costumes. You know, I love the pocket watch. Really, I'm missing the pocket watch guy.
You can still get them.
Yeah, you can still get pocket watches. That's good.
The work that you've done with, you keep calling the creature and not Caliban. Is that a conscious?
Yeah, no, he's as Mary Shelley purposely gives him no name, we of course give him no name. Although the second season he's forced to pick a name for himself. And he chooses the name of the dead pillar, which is appropriate for that sad, poetic character. We always call him the creature, as Mary Shelley did most of the time.
I don't think that I'm saying anything that no one's thought of, but obviously to me there were shades of a Phantom of the Opera in the way that character was built. Were you referencing that material?
No, not especially. Although I love Gasparo's book and I love the musical. But it's the creature more than any other character. People say who's the most like you, and I say it's the creature of Frankenstein. Who put them together, you have me, for good or ill. And so the creature came from my saddest, loneliest, most poignant place. Because when I read Mary Shelley, that's what I read. If that makes sense.
Sure. And it's an extraordinary imagining because that creature has always been not just like dumb and unintelligent, but dumb, unable to speak, unable to articulate ideas. And there's something really exciting about the idea of reanimating a body that's been cold and bloodless, and then he is reading, Shelley and quoting poetry. And
that's, that once again is Mary Shelley. You go back, I assume everyone's read the book, but if you haven't, when you read it and you think of the dumb creature of Boris Karloff, for the most part, and Christopher Lee, and some of those iterations, you read the book and you realize the most eloquent character is the creature, and he's heartbreakingly eloquent, and he speaks of poetry, philosophy, and theology. And so my conception, with both Frankenstein and the creature, because they only exist as a binary existence, as far as I'm concerned, is they both grew up with way too much poetry. The creature can learn the language by reading poetry and Frankenstein's notation on poetry, and young Frankenstein, you should forgive the expression, read poetry and it influenced him deeply. So it gave me as a writer, I must admit, entirely selfishly, the chance to let those characters explode in language in a way I couldn't do with Ethan Chandler or Vanessa Ives, because that wasn't their education or their sensibility.
There's another theme I really have been enjoying in the show, which is the characters' relationship to their own power. I feel like all these characters have incredible power over the people around them, and it's both this source of kind of intense hubris and shame. Everybody is both delighted and ashamed by their own power. I wonder if you guys could try to answer what was really a non-question. But maybe to speak to that theme, I mean, Frankenstein is, I think, can't stop this quest to discover the essence of life, but is doing monstrous things with this power.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes bad comes from good intentions and vice versa, I guess. That's what I can say about that.
I think that's just being an artist and being a human. That's what it sounds like to me. So I think.
Do you think Dorian has a lot of shame?
I think for sure. I think that there's something, an inherent sadness. I think that comes along with, if you can imagine, losing everyone you ever loved, and to kind of try to think about how you would respond to that in your behavior. But I do feel, I think that the portrait bears the burden of his sins, but I think that it certainly crosses his mind every now and again, especially when he's confronted with that portrait.
I'm hoping we're going to see the portrait in season 2.
At some point, we'll see the portrait.
When you're looking, what are you looking at when you're looking at it?
The first time it was a black screen with a bunch of green pieces of tape on it. But eventually I saw something, but I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but I think that you and the rest of the creative team wanted the freedom to potentially elaborate or alter what was seen. And also dramatically, I don't think it would have fit in what became the chaos of the finale. There was so much going on, I think, to show it would have been.
Yeah, originally, in the first early drafts of the script, you did see the portrait. You looked at it, and the audience saw it. But at the end of the day, when we filmed it and actually looked at it, we thought, you know what, this is something we want to hold off, because it is a great mystery. It is, of course, the coup de grace of Oscar Wilde's novel. So I felt to expose it in the first season was just premature, so we'll tease it out a bit.
And it was Magic Eye. You guys remember Magic Eye? John wanted to integrate some sort of modern 80s sort of stuff into this. I work hypercolor, and this was Magic Eye, but it didn't work out, didn't make the cuts.
Did you want to address that concept of power and shame? Because I think, Ethan, again, I mean, there's literal shame for what he's done, but I think there's a secondary shame, which is trying to kind of remake. He's spent all his waking hours trying to remake the world, and I don't know if thematically that pops for you when you're working, or if you see that for your character, that he's very much ashamed of how powerful he is.
Ethan.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But are you talking about, what do you mean by remake?
Well, I mean, I think like I said, I think he when he turns into a wolf, he's destroying almost indiscriminately, except for the very deserved ass kicking that he gave at the end of the season. Yeah, right. Those guys had to come in, but I feel like this incredible compassion he has, that he's trying to save Fenton, and he's trying to save Rona, and he's trying to save Vanessa, and he's trying to save everyone. Every moment of his way, is trying to bring delight to people in whatever way he's capable.
We were talking about middle names backstage, and I think his middle name is Shame. And he just he lives in a shame spiral. I think he just fears, he fears his own capabilities. He doesn't know what they are yet. I don't think personally, and we've discussed it. I think that I think he knows that he wants of course, and he doesn't even notice that when he comes to violence committed, but I don't think he understands the extent of what he becomes. It's going to be interesting in season 2 to see him react to that.
Right, because in season 2, Josh has done a lot of talking about what exactly does he even know for these events. He has his little lycanthropic episodes. And what we came to is what was in one version of the script, which is he blacks out, there's blood, he doesn't know, he's horrific, and he feels guilty because he knows monstrous things have happened. You see the scene when he wakes up on the beach, the realization that something has happened. So in the second season, he finds out exactly what he is, and he has to grapple with the consequences of that, which is great fun for me to write. Because every time a character makes a realization, it's instant free drama for the writers.
That's going to be great for me as an actor because I spent a lot of the first season almost, of a lot of the first few episodes reacting to everything around me and kind of being sort of the eyes and ears of the audience. And that's a less productive place to be than the person who's actually actively discovering what he's all about, finding out these horrible things.